it's important that we don't very quickly get into an us versus them conversation, so that we're here on our side and then there are some postmodernists over there and we want to beat them or out-argue them, or at least diminish their voice and their power in our society. The way an idea comes into a culture has to mean that it affects everything and it affects everybody. There are pulls and pressures that act on all of us, and some of us react to them in this way, some of them react to them in that way. Assuming that we're all a little bit implicated, let's look at what's wrong with postmodernism. I think the first thing that's wrong is an absolutely central tenet of any postmodernist disposition, and that's that thinking it makes it so. So straight away, you realize that that's an idea that makes a hell of a lot of sense. I mean, if you went for a jog this morning, there is a certain way in which what we say about what you did, how we talk about what you did, how we think about what you did, will affect what it is that you actually did. Because if you went for a jog and then you recorded a YouTube video about it that got 1 million hits, and in your video you said, jogging is for losers, that might, to some extent, change the concept of jogging as we use it. It might be something that is less connected with exercise and health promotion and more connected with narcissism or self-indulgence or something else. So that's a superficial way in which, with a simple concept like jogging, thinking it makes it so. But then there is a deeper way in which thinking it makes it so. And that's that when you are running at a certain tempo, it's only a jog because you and I share an intersubjective understanding of the cultural practice you're engaged in. If a Maasai warrior, unfamiliar with the concept of jogging, went through the physical motions of jogging, he wouldn't be jogging. He would just be running at a certain pace. So it's only because we think of jogging in a certain way that it is what it is. Take another example. I might have had a wallet in my pocket. In my wallet, there might be a £10 note. And of course, what it is to some extent depends on what we think about it. First of all, if a great number of people go on about how dreadful this currency is, that might affect the value of the currency. But then again, there is a deeper sense in which thinking it makes it so with money. It's only because we take the £10 note to be what it is, that it is what it is. If you try to offer that £10 note in a culture without the institution of money, it would be meaningless. So these are examples in which perfectly rightly thinking it makes it so. But here's the problem. There is so much in life which can't be taken in that way. There is so much in life about which we cannot say that thinking it makes it so. I mean, let's take an example. What are you? Like, really, basically, what are you? I don't mean what kind of a life you're leading, but what are you? Well, you're an individual. Well, what is that? Well, it's a thing which has a certain neurophysiological structure to it. Over and above that neurophysiological structure sits a psychology. And that psychology has a certain shape. Like, it just does have a certain shape. It means that you have a particular relationship with your past and your present and your future. it means that you react in certain fairly stable ways to particular things that happen to you or don't happen to you. That psychology that you have has a certain depth to it. It has a certain level of conflictedness. Now, we might debate, and it might be controversial, how to fill out these quite general statements about your psychology, but your psychology has a certain kind of shape, irrespectively of what it is that we think about it. You know, if you take somebody from a very, very different culture to ours, from a time long gone historically, and you ask them what are the top 3 things they want in life, they will tell you, and then you bring it about that their life actually has none of these. Will they be happy or not? No, they won't be happy, because what they want their life to be will be obstructed, and there is nothing you can think about that's going to change it. That is just so, because the kind of shape that human makeup has. Then there are some more obvious things to say. It is, for example, true that Donald Trump won the presidential election in 2016. Now, few people might argue about that, but nevertheless, it's important to say that there can't be any story told about that contradicts that fact. No conceivable historical account of this period of history, even 500 years from now, could say and be right that Hillary Clinton won instead, or that Bernie Sanders did. So the central problem with a postmodernist disposition is the problem of thinking it makes it so, and thinking it does make it so in so many ways. But there are many respects in which you can't make do with it, in which you have to say that certain things are just simply true. I think there's one more really important way in which a postmodernist disposition gets the world wrong, and that's to think of our concepts as being things that either have to take their most ambitious shape, or alternatively be things which in the end amount to nothing at all. There's a beautiful line in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics when he's discussing Plato's form of the good, where he says that a white thing ain't gonna be any more white if it is white for a single day than if it were white for an eternity. The way this really matters in our conversation about postmodernism is that even people who don't in any way subscribe to what they describe as a postmodernist view nevertheless have this prejudice in our culture that they want an idea or a concept to be everything it can be, or else it's got to be nothing. They want an idea to be everything that it was originally intended to be, or else it's got to be nothing. We often think of our values, we often think of our belief in human rights as being a thing which has to apply to all of the world, which has to be universal, or else it's got to be nothing. Because if human rights are only a thing that has normative grip in the modern world, well, then it can't have any normative grip even for us here and now. One of the most famous examples of this conversation that postmodernism brings up is a conversation about authorial intent, the intent of a novelist when she puts something down on the page, the intent of a composer when she puts something down on the page. And the idea is that you have to give a demonstration of what somebody intended that is very clear, very transparent, unpixelated, and obvious. You look for that idea. And then you realize, oh God, I can't find that in any execution of any major work of art. I can't find something that is as clear as Beethoven having a bubble emanating out of his head which says, yes, this chord I want played with an ecstatic gratitude at that tempo and with this distribution of weight between each finger. I don't see that. Well, show that to me. Is that in his diaries? No. Is that in his conversation books, of which he has many because he was deaf? Is that in the score? Is that in some kind of appropriately arrived at analysis of the score? No, I don't see that. So therefore, let's quit this idea that there's something he intended. And of course, the problem with that is that it misses out on all the much more plausible, much more real-to-life conceptualizations of Beethoven's intent that are actually necessary for us to explain what he was doing. And these conceptions of intent, ones that we need, won't be obvious. They won't be something you can make demonstrable. They won't be something you can factually demonstrate. They will be a matter of interpretation. They'll be a matter of sitting down and saying, well, what's it feel like in this bar that he meant? Could he have meant this? Maybe not. What about that? Okay, this is closer. And eventually we're establishing a bracket of possibilities for this particular bar or for this particular chord of Beethoven that we're playing. And that may be as much as we can get. We may only get a bracket of possibilities as we might get with an individual person. So yes, it might be true that you can express what an individual person is in 29 or 743 different ways. But there are nevertheless clear limits about how you can express it. There are so many things that you can't say. If you have a friend who is courageous, you will not say she is cowardly. If you have a friend who's endlessly generous, you won't say she is stingy. But it might be true that there are 79 different ways of capturing her generosity, all of them true to this or that extent. And none of them can be exhaustively summarized into something that's an account of her generosity neatly held together, or an account of her generosity that is somehow factually obvious, demonstrable, or obvious in any other way at all. So it's very important that in this culture, we don't fetishize this sense that a thing has to be everything it could possibly be, or it's got to be nothing. And in this way, of course, the postmodernist sensibility has wrong with it precisely the same thing that the things it objects to most vehemently has wrong with it, which is, of course, the most ambitious, the most metaphysically elevated accounts of a particular concept or of a particular value or a particular thing. And it's only if we begin giving more real-to-life accounts of the different things we might have in mind that we're going to realize that the fact that the most ambitious version of the thing isn't available by no means the imagination means that the whole thing amounts to nothing and just crumbles.
Why are people attracted to postmodernism? Why do they talk about it?
It's a question that I think straight away takes us into a conflict, because the intellectual consequences of a postmodernist disposition is that one's sense of self, one's sense of oneself as an individual dissolves. But the existential hold, the psychological stimulation of what postmodernism offers is a kind of elevation and strengthening of my sense of myself as an individual. A kind of elevation of the self, because now I'm endlessly free to interpret and make of the world what I like. But at the same time, the consequences of my thinking are going to lead me to the conclusion that the self that has got so elevated and celebrated in this process now makes no sense to me.